Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. Washington has almost 11,000 police officers across 170 agencies and no standardized tracking of police use of force. Until this week. In a minute, we'll learn what the Washington State Data Exchange for Public Safety could mean for people, police, and policy. But first, let's get you caught up. Thousands of unionized grocery workers have until tonight to vote on whether to authorize a strike against Kroger and Albertsons. Their union, UFCW 3000, is urging members to authorize a strike and reject the company's latest contract offer. Union leaders say while the grocery chains did offer workers a better pension plan, workers are still calling for better pay and staffing levels. Officials with Washington's Ecology Department will give an update this morning on worsening drought conditions across the state. A drought emergency was initially declared in April for several parts of Washington, but officials say conditions have deteriorated since then. State leaders are holding a press conference at 10:30 this morning. We'll have more details on this evening's episode of Seattle Now. And the Seattle rock band Heart needs your help locating some stolen instruments, including guitarist Nancy Williams' custom-built purple Telecaster guitar and a vintage 1966 mandolin. The band says the instruments were stolen at a New Jersey venue over the weekend just as they were kicking off their nationwide tour. Heart is offering an unspecified reward to anyone with information that leads to the instrument's return. By the way, Heart is playing the George Amphitheater August 8th. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. People in Washington state will soon have access to more information about police use of force. The public database is a partnership between the Washington Attorney General's Office and Washington State University, called WADEPS, or the Washington State Data Exchange for Public Safety. The data will help give a more accurate picture of use of force by officers statewide. The hope is that the transparency will build trust, and the data will also help gauge the effectiveness of efforts like a de-escalation policy.
We didn't have a statewide analysis to tell us if it worked, where it worked, how it worked, when it worked. That's a disservice. And it's not the fault of the legislature or anyone. We just hadn't thought about creating a system like this.
WADEP's Executive Director David Macon is here to tell us more. David, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
It was 5 years in the making to get to the Washington State Data Exchange for Public Safety's launch this week. What possibilities does it create in Washington?
So I'll give you the classic example. When we first started, we had a very basic question, which was, how frequently do police use force when responding to a mental health call? And the answer was, we don't know. Even right now, 2025, we can't give anybody that answer. Seattle can say, for us, but we don't have a standardized way to be able to look at agencies, their rates of force among this population, and more critically, what are the agencies or the officers that have a lot of these types of contact, but very rarely apply force? That is something that we get to learn from. And that's never been possible with a statewide database.
So you could look at a department that doesn't use force, examine that department, and share information with other departments. Tell me about the goals of this database.
It's really designed to take all this disparate data, right? And I think it's important for the audience to know the data is already collected. It's just held in silos. It can't really help us understand what use of force looks like across the state, across different types of agencies in different communities. So really all the data exchange does is take all that data and bring it together in a central location so you have standardized, reliable data that is updated every single month.
I'm glad you brought that up because this was interesting to me that this information already exists. I was frankly surprised that it didn't already exist in this form. We have fairly comprehensive databases, CODIS, for example, of criminals, people who have been convicted. We carry that information across the U.S. between departments. Why not this? Why now?
No, I think a lot of this, it starts with the murder of George Floyd, and it really led us to ask the right questions, which was, what do we know about use of force? Where is it occurring the most? But not just a count, right? I mean, plenty of states have created use of force data collection programs, right? New Jersey, probably one of the most notable. And what we saw is this opportunity to really better contextualize. So when you look at all of these use of force studies, it's very common that what is missing is context.
Okay, so reducing or getting rid of use of force seems like one of the goals of this database. So maybe now is a good time to define it. What is use of force?
I think most often when people hear use of force, they almost always think that it is when an officer puts their hands on you, or, we have an officer involved in shooting. The way use of force is defined, it can include if an officer points a firearm at a person, if a firearm is discharged in the direction of a person but does not strike them, when an officer might use a less lethal. There's so many different types of force that it's not always an officer physically putting their hands or using an instrument upon a person. And I think if we start from police should never use force, we're starting from an impossibility, because there will always be a time and a place for it. What we are fundamentally trying to change is unreasonable or unnecessary use of force. Are there situations in which alternatives could be used in lieu of the application of force? And what WADEPS does is it also tells the public what is within policy or not, what is investigated externally versus internally, and what the results of that was. And that's so important, because right now we don't close the loop on use of force, right? Like we have, officers involved in shootings that are all over the news, right? And they're critical, and they get traced all the way around, right? From start to what the outcome is. The vast majority of force is not that. And yet we know next to nothing, if you ask the public, on how often use of force is within policy, how often is it investigated externally, how long does it take, what is the outcome. The public gets all of that.
Why is this standardization so important?
We got to get to apples, right? I think I always use this analogy, but when we standardize, it's like we can compare, right? I can compare, if someone uses a taser or capsaicin spray, right? Or they use a baton.
Okay, you said this data is for the public to review and use. As a member of the public, how would I use this?
I'll take a step back and give you another stakeholder perspective. So we had an opportunity to meet with the Association of City Managers. And the topic came up around new industry that comes in. And take Pasco, for example. They have the Amazon fulfillment center. Everyone was incredibly excited, right? All the jobs, right? All the tax revenue. There's just excitement. And the question was just ask, what impact did it have on public safety? Which I think is a pretty interesting question. This system would allow us to answer that. Right? We would be able to look at the dispatch data. So that's how often people call 911, how often an officer initiates a contact, how often there is a scheduled patrol. We'd be able to use that data to answer the question.
It sounds like you're seeing this database as a way to look at crime and policing in a different way.
What this data exchange does is it lets people see what public safety interactions look like in their communities and other communities. We've gone as far as to code every single law enforcement agency's use of force policy to see if agencies have a more restrictive use of force policy. So an example might be an agency that says our officers cannot use OC spray. Well, if I'm a member of the public and I'm looking at these two agencies going, wow, their rates of force are very different, wouldn't it be helpful to know? Well, the reason for that could be they cannot use one of the reportable uses of force.
There's a lot of nuance. What will it mean for policing in Washington having access to this information?
As of Monday, June 2nd, every single law enforcement agency has a data analyst to support data analysis requests. You can literally go to the website. Anybody can. The public, researchers, agencies, the public, and ask them a question of the data that we have. And they will analyze it for you, and they will give you an answer.
What do you hope changes in our state over time as a result of this data collection, David?
Trust. I think we have, mistrust on, in many ways, all sides. A mistrust of data, a mistrust of just each other. And there's generational trauma and there's history in that. But the data can only help us, right? When we only have stories, we have anecdotes, and we don't have any data to support it, it doesn't mean that those stories are not meaningful. They are, right? And many of them are born out of tragedy. This brings data to bear so that we can substantiate it. If we have a problem, let's do something about it. And let's also analyze if it worked. So often we pass initiatives and there's no data to suggest if it worked or not. We cannot be a state as advanced as we are and not engage evidence-based practices.
David Mencken is Executive Director of the Washington State Data Exchange for Public Safety. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And if there's any questions from your audience, please email us and we'll do our best to answer.
Fantastic. Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Vaughn Jones, Andy Hurst, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.